I'm Claire, your very fearful host, and I am here in Spooky Butt Studio with Drew Mantia. Drew Mantia is a Midwest-based music producer and mixer whose work with independent artists across pop, R&B, and hip-hop has amassed more than 200 million streams. Best known for producing Joshua Showtime Williams' viral R&B hit Nasty and LSD by Prob Cause featuring Chance the Rapper, Drew brings a musician's perspective and release-ready production to every project, working with artists in St. Louis and remotely worldwide. Beyond artist releases, his music has been featured on Netflix, MTV, BET, CBS, Hulu, and television networks around the world. He is also responsible for the music for this humble podcast. Woo-woo. Drew Mantia, welcome to Spooky Butt.
Hello. Yeah, my honor to make the music for your great new podcast, and I was really excited by your vision. Always a weird word to use when we're talking about music, but for lack of a better term, your vision for what the theme would be like, and it was really fun to create that.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to kind of start this off with, so we met fairly recently. We met maybe around like Memorial Day, early June. And what's interesting is that we actually have a bunch of mutual friends in common. So it's a little bit weird that our paths didn't cross until about 2 months ago. But I did want to say that when I was getting everything kind of ready for Spooky Butt and doing all of the prep, when it came to the music, I set the intention. I was like, listen, I want this to be done by a Webster University alum because that's where I went to school. And yeah, I had a bunch of friends who were in the music program. So I was trying to recapture that fun from my college days because it was so cool going to Webster and like having friends who were in the jazz program or whatever, because instead of just going out to bars and partying, we would also go out to see like live, excellent music. So I'm so glad that I was able to find you at the time that I did. And we were able to kind of capture that magic for Spooky Butt.
Totally. Yeah, I remember, I used to, when I was at Webster's Music School, I had a work study job where I was a music building monitor, which just meant like they kept bodies on site until I think it was all the way until midnight, until the building closed. Security would come to close the building down at the end of the night, but they would have a handful of students there to just like, I don't know, make sure the place didn't burn down or something. And we would often, go dereliction of duty and just sneak out and go to, nearby jazz clubs or go down to, the Del Mar Loop. Like there's this spot, Riddle's Penultimate, that was a spot we would go to, and we would see other students or even just other local jazz musicians perform. And, they had a system where you would clock in and out of your work study shift by just like leaving a voicemail on somebody's answering machine. So we'd just be like in the bathroom of jazz clubs, like just Drew Mantia clocking out. And as long as there was like a couple of us there when the security guy came to lock down, like no, it wouldn't ruffle enough feathers to get anybody in trouble. But yeah, so I definitely had a similar experience.
That's so funny. I had no idea about that. That's perfect. And it's like, of course people are going to abuse that, but yeah, hey, you made the most of your time.
Oh, it was a sweet deal in the first place because like you were allowed to practice as much as you wanted, do your homework, mess around on the computer, play games, watch movies, whatever, as long as you were just a butt in seat at the music department building. That was the job. But so we didn't even all the way fulfill that duty that was already like, just be here and you can do whatever you want. We had some parties down there drinking and stuff. I mean, we pushed an already very cushy gig. But yeah, it was a form of scholarship. I got like a partial tuition reimbursement in exchange for that. So pretty good deal.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh my God, that's just so funny. So with your degree from Webster, so was it like jazz composition or was it music production? What exactly was it?
It was a combo. They had and they may still have they had two forms of jazz studies. There was jazz studies performance and jazz studies music technology, and they were almost identical except for I think 5 classes. I had to take less like jazz history and a couple other things, and in exchange some low level audio classes. And what I did was that, plus I took every one of my free credits as every one of my elective credits in the audio department, which I had a lot because I went to a school that had college credit courses, a high school that is. And so by the time I got to college, I had several college level credits, and the music department had a very low threshold for gen ed necessary credits. And so I didn't have any gen ed requirements by the time I was in their music program. So I was able to take, I don't remember, how many credit hours or how many classes I ended up taking in the audio department, but I was able to take a significant, I actually, looking back on it, not that anybody really cares about my degree, but I really could have just done the jazz studies performance and then minored in audio engineering because I took so many audio classes. But since a handful of those were required under the jazz studies music technology, I wasn't able to do the minor. But no one cares about my degree or ask. People will, out of curiosity, ask me like, oh, did you study this and whatever? But I've never had an opportunity where somebody's like, well, I need to see your degree. And if they did, it would kind of be hilarious because my degree actually was typoed. So my diploma from Webster says Bachelor's of Music, emphasis music. So really,
Nice.
really elegant document I have there. So
Right. So like with the music instruction at Webster and then like your kind of career right after college, that was all analog, correct? Like creating analog music and not necessarily beat making, right?
The basis of it was at the time that I was at Webster, there were some very old school guys heading the department. I'm talking about like, these guys were like, their main interest was like the techniques of the Beatles records and stuff like that. Wow. But I'm not complaining at all because that was getting that kind of knowledge from them and being challenged to do things like work on tape and work on analog equipment. Even though like I'm a very digital based producer and engineer, but having that opportunity to do those things and learn from, even though they were behind the times, I was taking care of the digital audio side. I was learning that on my own. I didn't really need help because I was going to spend the time to do that. So I was really fully content to have these super old school guys teach me techniques from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I could then adopt into a digital workflow. And, that is something that still sticks with me that I did. I started on tape, like cassette tape. You could get, a home recorder with 4 or 8 tracks to a cassette tape. And I started, making crappy recordings at the same time I started playing guitar. Like for me, music making and recording making was always blended. And I got into music because of my love of listening to recordings. I wasn't really exposed to live music until after I was already making music myself. I'm not from a family of musicians. No one in my extended family was a musician.
Oh, wow.
I didn't really have any exposure. My parents would take me to church on Sundays, but it wasn't even a cool church with like good music. It was like an old guy playing the piano and some old ladies like singing in unison. It was very boring and very vanilla and not interesting. And so I had, very little exposure to live music or musicians until I started learning myself and playing with other kids that were learning and making recordings. So playing and recording were always, the first day I started playing guitar, I wrote a crappy song with the open strings of the guitar and recorded it on a crappy tape recorder. So, those have always been the same journey for me. And so, yeah, I started on tape, and then later in high school, I got, like a standalone digital recorder. Like it wasn't like a computer system. It was a little box that had faders and everything and knobs, and it was digital recording, but all, built into a device. And so I had learned all of that. I think back often to my first audio class at Webster because, we were there a little early waiting for the professor to come in, and I'm kind of, we're chatting around with the other kids, introducing ourselves. And I'm like, what have you been recording? What's your background? And they're like, and, some kids were like, oh, I've never recorded anything. And, they were audio engineering majors. And I was like, that's really interesting to me that, like I've been recording for years at this point.
Yeah.
For, by that point, like 5 years or something, I had been making recordings all the time. And, it was interesting that someone had, and this was more than one other student that had this experience where they had chosen audio engineering as their emphasis, their major of study, but like had never made a recording before. I was like, that's interesting that is,
yeah.
Because, it would be, like to get into the music school, you had to audition and show some proficiency that you had learned an instrument and had some initial level of mastery with it. And, so that was interesting to me. But yeah, so digital audio was not an emphasis at all in their department. I did later, eventually they did have some digital audio classes, and I did take those. I took a class on there was a couple digital audio classes that led into a commercial composition class, which is which really has roots in what I've done for your show, as far as it was about how to construct music for applications like programs, like especially it was especially rooted around creating music for TV and film. Like we would take little scenes, our professor would give us the raw footage of stuff that he had done composition work to, and we would do our own composition projects, to those scenes and everything. But that's where I learned about, how to time out the music and stuff like that, which is a kind of skill that came in, to your project, because we're talking about how long we want the intro to be and what the genre is. And that helps me, like, okay, this is the tempo. And if the tempo is this, then I can do, this many bars of music within the time frame that we're trying to hit, and things like that. So so to their credit, I did also end up getting some, digital education as well. But yes, it was initially very rooted in the old school technique.
Oh, that's so cool, because that, like, you kind of bridge that gap because you
Yes.
have that analog experience. Whereas nowadays it's like, what, 99% digital? So it's cool that you can
Totally.
come at it from that perspective, and that informs
Yeah.
your digital
and I'm
producing.
fully digital at this point. Like
Mhm.
my entire studio is it looks pretty bare bones, because I mean, most of the investment is in like the software that I use, software instruments and stuff, which what I like about that is I can capture performances really quick because I don't have to spend time sound checking things and whatever. If I'm playing a keyboard part, I can put just kind of a generic piano sound or something on, get my idea down, and then on the computer, I can sculpt that performance into any sound of instrument that I want. Whereas if you're recording analog, that instrument has to sound like what it's going to end up sounding like when you record it.
Right. So you got out of Webster and then you basically jumped into the music business, correct?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend people do it this way, but kind of do as I say, not as I do. I might recommend to somebody, like, get a job that you don't completely hate, that has some flexibility where you can like work your way up in the musical world. But for me, I just dove both feet in before I ever established anything in the working world. So, I've never had a full-time job.
Wow.
In my life. I went from part-time kitchen gigs. I was a cook for years. I went from part-time kitchen gigs, and then I started, transitioning into teaching guitar lessons and playing guitar gigs, and then, started doing recording sessions for people. And so I did, up until from my teens to my early 20s, those years I had, the side jobs in the kitchens. But then, I think when I was 24, which was 16 years ago, that was the last time that I had a non-musical job. And I mean, to be straight with you, I was super broke in my 20s. So,
Me too.
And, I just fought through it. That was my method. It depends. Some people have different tolerances. No shade on my parents, but like my upbringing wasn't very financially stable. So I felt like it was almost an advantage, because when I decided to take that dive into music, like, poverty or near poverty was something that I was already used to. So it wasn't like a step backwards in lifestyle or something. I was already scraping by. So it was like, well, if I can just make music and scrape by, that's huge. That's
right.
That versus, being in kitchens and scraping by, or like, living under my parents and scraping by. Like, this is amazing. So, I wasn't super financially sound in my 20s, but I never missed a bill. I didn't plan for the future and stuff until my 30s. And I was actually able to catch up on responsible things like, funding a retirement and owning a home, and being married and all these adult, not that these are things you have to do to become an adult, but they were actually things that weren't really on my radar at all, but just, very gratefully, like, my music work led me down a path to eventually in my 30s, I found stability, of, lifestyle and of finance. And, I didn't know if things like eventually owning a home or being married or something were for me, but I just ended up, down that path. I did get to a point in, kind of going into 30 where I was like, I don't know if I want to be married or own a home, or if I care about healthcare or retirement, because in my 20s, I wasn't having health issues and I wasn't thinking about the future. I was in a sense very zen because I was very like one day at a time. And, I didn't have a bigger vision for the future. I just knew that it was all music all the time. And that's what mattered to me, and the rest that I would figure out, because as long as I was living a life that was music first, that was enough to satisfy. And then, going into my 30s, I was like, I don't know if I want all those things that, a quote unquote normal job would have provided, but I don't want to feel like I'm disqualified from having them. I was like, if I'm not married, I want it to be a lifestyle choice and not, I feel like nobody wants to marry me because I'm, financial dead weight or, I don't want to, if I continue to be a renter for a long time, I want that to be a choice and not because like I couldn't possibly afford to buy a house and on and on. So, and then, I figured out a way to do both and do it my way. And, I always, when I first picked up that guitar and that cassette recorder, I had, the intersection of art and commerce on my mind. I was from the jump, like once I was always, my life as a music fan, was so important. And I knew years before I picked up instruments, I wanted to do it. I guess it just took a while for me to convince my parents that I was going to be dedicated enough to, spend money that was not readily available on instruments and lessons and stuff like that. And eventually I was able to convince them that it would be, worth the investment for them, to get me into the game. So like a musical future was on my mind for, almost my entire life. And by the time shortly after I picked up the guitar and the tape recorder, I was like, I want to do this all the time. I want to do this as a vocation. Just if nothing else, just for the reason that like, I feel like for me to make as much music, as many hours of the day as I want to, I'm just going to have to find a way to make money with it, because I don't want to spend 8 hours doing something else and then do my music. I want to do my music and then make time for other things in life. So I've never had an issue with the idea of art and commerce interacting. I think that art is absolutely valid on its own. Anyone, art is for everyone, and anyone that's interested in any form of art, any form of creativity should do that. It's a total worthy pursuit, whether you want to share it with the world or just do it for yourself, or, share it with the world, but not with commercial intention. That's however you want to go about that. That's totally beautiful. And I know I've met plenty of people who feel like art and commerce are at odds. And I've always just felt at peace with that. Maybe it's because I was so driven by my love for the radio and for, listening to recordings and stuff. And I understood that this was these people's livelihood. And, at that time, like home recording was becoming a more viable thing. But when I was young, that was new. And, you know, up till that point in like all of history, if you wanted to make recordings, you had to have a financial situation going on. You had to have a record. I mean, you know, certainly in times of like, I referenced the Beatles earlier, like the 60s, like someone like that, they couldn't have just made recordings on their own. They had to work with a label. They had to have backers to even be able, people didn't even know what the inside of a recording studio looked like. And part of what was so revolutionary about the Beatles was not only they were revolutionary in pushing recording and audio engineering techniques to create these sounds that they were hearing in their heads. And they collaborated with their audio engineers to create so many techniques that are now like daily techniques for people like me. But they also inspired the garage band revolution of people wanting to pick up guitars and drum sets and get with their friends in the garage and start making music. And, you know, down the road that led to people wanting to be able to, you know, make their own recordings, and it became more available. But that's all a tangent just to say that I recognized early on that there was financial factors involved that allowed these people to make their recordings and get them out there. And I knew that I not only wanted to be making music, but I wanted to first and foremost make recordings. That was my, you know, I love performing, and performing was also a bigger focus for me earlier in my career, as I started off also being like an artist myself. But recordings were always the first love for me. So, you know, it wasn't just music. It was what, you know, I just heard those recordings and I was like, I want to do everything that's happening right now. The instruments, the writing, the recording technology, whatever it takes to make this recording that's on my radio or on my cassette tape or my CD. That's what I want to learn how to do.
That's awesome. And it's interesting that you brought up the Beatles and like record labels and all that sort of thing, because my next question for you is, how long have you been fully independent?
I mean, the whole time, you know, I've had, I've worked under like some contracts here and there. I actually, like kind of the first major experience that led me to producing for other people was I was actually signed to a startup label in my late teens and early 20s as a singer-songwriter, where this was just a local recording studio who, you know, decided that they wanted to use their studio to invest in some new talent. So it basically was just an arrangement of, I got free studio time at their studio, and in exchange, you know, they would get whatever percentage of sales of my albums, which, you know, is kind of the typical kind of recording contract. It was definitely structured, modeled like what a major label recording contract would look like. You know, I had like a 3-album deal with them, and you know, I really begged them to let me be the producer of my own first album. And they agreed. And so they let, you know, I was given access to a studio and an engineer, and I was able to, you know, bring in myself and other musicians, other Webster musicians mostly, because I was already, you know, I was a freshman, sophomore, junior at Webster when this was going on, and you know, produced that recording. And it was formative in a couple ways. First of all, I was really disappointed in the engine. They had few different engineers that they had working with me, and I was pretty disappointed with their skills. the project still turned out pretty good. But it was really like I really had to push for what my audio vision was, and they made it kind of difficult. And that was really informed my future. That informed my future in that I've myself as an artist, like, had the experience of working in a studio and being like, these guys don't get it, or they're too slow, or they're messing up, or just, generally feeling like, with the experience that I had gathered messing around at home and starting to take audio classes at Webster, I was like, I really feel like I could just do this whole thing better. Like, they're letting me produce it musically, but like, I think I could do this recording and mixing of it better myself as well. And, also, they were, I guess I framed it as they were giving me free studio time. They were invoicing me the studio time to like be paid back through the recordings. So it wasn't just like free unlimited studio time. I was racking up a bill, which is how labels work. I was racking up a bill that my records were supposed to pay back. And I was like, these guys are just wasting time and money, and I feel like I could do it better. So the second album that I did with them, I also engineered it as well. I mostly did it at home. They let me use their studio. I did some, recorded the drummer there and stuff like that, and then did a lot of it at home. Because I also recognized, like, I don't want to keep like running up this studio tab with them if I feel like I can do a better job myself. So I did part of it at their studio, some of it at Webster, a lot of it just at my apartment at the time. And other musicians at Webster, I was showing them, they were seeing me perform. We were performing together at shows, on bills together. I was performing at like school concerts. I was, playing them my recordings, and they were like, "Oh, you produced this?" And then like, on the second album, I also had recorded it and mixed it too. And they're like, "Oh, well, like, we know you know music because we're in music school with you. And so if you know audio too, like, come work on ours." So that was like my first experience being hired to engineer and produce other people's recordings, because of my experience working with that label and putting my music. They were also, impressed that even though it was like a no-name startup label, they were impressed that I had a label contract. And they were also impressed that like my music was on iTunes.
Okay.
Like, because at the time, like, today anybody can easily, release their music on every digital platform easily. Spotify, Apple Music, everything, so easily. It costs $20 a year for the basic membership to release as much music as you want. I mean, it's become super accessible. But my first album release was in 2008, and it was not easy, or common at least, to be on iTunes with your digital release and to have, printed, professionally designed and printed CDs and all of that. So I started there, but then, when other people started hiring me to do theirs, I was like, yeah, I really love this. And, I can make an album like once a year or once every 2 years as myself, or I could make like 10 albums a year. And, I might not be the primary songwriter or vocalist, but I still find it really, pretty equally satisfying, because I was so like recording first with my love of music that I was, kind of quickly drawn away from the artist thing. 'Cause I also, I loved to perform, but it was, energetically more taxing than the studio thing. And it was also like when I'm producing for artists, they're in charge of releasing the music and trying to get it heard and marketing and booking the shows. And, you know, when I was the artist, I was doing this startup label was helping me with some stuff. And in retrospect, they did more for me than I thought they did. You know, in hindsight, they did more for me. You know, part of the reason I stopped too is like I was disappointed that the label didn't do more, which is like a common theme you see from artists when like a label has to be a supplement to what you're already doing for yourself, not like, oh, well, I have a label or I'm going to seek a label and then I'm just going to do nothing but make music. Like artists, even major label artists, are heavily involved in their business, their back, you know, they're not, there's very few artists who are just sitting back doing nothing but making music. That's really, you know, an illusion. But I was caught up in that illusion as a young singer-songwriter. And I was also like disappointed in my album sales, which is another thing in hindsight. I'm like, damn, I killed it. Like I sold hundreds of CDs, you know, at full price, which like looking at it now where everything is like streaming based for like sub a penny per stream, I was like, I had people buying my album for $20 and I sold hundreds of them. Like, I'm like, that's crazy. You know, if an artist that I produce for right now was like, oh, in the past few months, I just sold 200 copies of my CD at full price, I'd be like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like you need to push hard because you're doing it. So, but I, at the end of the day, I have no regrets stepping out of the artist thing. So
yeah. And I kind of on that note, I do want to switch gears a little bit because I'm curious. When did you start working with podcasters?
So, it would have been, I think 2017.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that was, and producing brought me there. Because I mean, obviously, like I've had the audio skills for a long time because compared to, you know, producing a sometimes complex musical arrangements and recordings, you know, doing a few dialogue mics and some background music and stuff for a podcast is like really easy. And I was also, you know, I got into podcasts like fairly early, like 2010. I was listening to like podcasts regularly, like, you know, some stuff that's cringe to me now, like Joe Rogan and stuff like that.
Right.
But like I was on like the first early years of like Joe Rogan and stuff like that, stuff that like I wouldn't listen to now. But anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But so I understood podcasts as a listener, and one of like my indie artists that I've been referencing in this conversation that, you know, they had a fan base and they had, they were doing like a YouTube series that their fans really liked where they, you know, did footage of themselves on the road and at shows and stuff like that. And, we're doing that and it was really cool. I kind of wish they still did it, but you know, it was, they were doing it completely themselves. And one of them, was a film major in school. So it's like, he knows what and he worked in film editing before he became full time with his music. So, I mean, they had the skills to shoot and edit that stuff, but it was very labor intensive and a labor of love. So they decided to try podcasting as a way that they could share their personality with their fans on a more consistent basis, because podcasting was way easier than, you know, producing these, you know, basically like they were like short form docuseries episodes that were, you know, 10 to 20 minutes. Like I said, I wish they did they were really cool. I wish they still, because once they got into the podcast, they like all, you know, occasionally they'll do for like something special that happens. They'll do a kind of behind the scenes like that, but, or a tour wrap up or something. I wish they still did those more often, but they went to the podcast format And so I helped them learn how to. I actually, initially they're a duo. I was initially like producer and third mic, and developed the tech that they needed, and over time, taught them how to use it, how to edit it themselves. And eventually, this was when I lived in Chicago, and eventually when I made the decision to move back to St. Louis, it wasn't really viable to be third mic. I mean, I guess we're doing even though we're in the same city, we're doing a remote podcast right now. And I do like a lot of my work is remote now, producing as well. But I guess we just weren't as minded around production or, remote being a viable option. It's not also like, not like my presence was super important. I mostly just like laughed at their jokes and stuff, but there were fans who like expressed that it added to their enjoyment, just like hearing me stupidly laugh in the background to what they were saying, and eventually like saying something that was like occasionally funny and sometimes stupid on the mic myself. So there were people who were sad at my exit as a normal presence, but I still will guest on occasion and stuff. Yeah, at this point, I've fully taught them how to record and edit it themselves, and but they still work off, just like I also helped you with for this show. I built them a template to record into and edit in, back in 2017. It might have even been 2016, but at the latest, it was 2017. And, to this day, they still are recording and editing in that template I built, and in, the equipment that I helped pick out for them.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the template because I know there are probably some aspiring podcasters who are listening to this, because I know I have some friends who have kind of shown an interest. And I wanted to say that you created that template for me, and then you recorded a video showing me how to use it. Mm-hmm. And editing was the one thing that I was really dreading about doing this whole project.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of become my favorite part, because that template has saved me hours.
Awesome.
So I want to drive home that Drew can help you if you're trying to get a podcast set up, and then Drew can do this remotely. Because what I did was I sent you the first episode I ever recorded. I sent you the 2 audio files, and then you built the template around that. So I just want to drive that home. There's help out there.
We did that remotely. We worked together in my studio to create the theme song, but also like that's something that I am fully equipped and experienced in doing remotely too. So if anyone out there is an aspiring podcaster, I can build your templates. I can help teach you how to edit and mix, and I can make you a theme song if you need that too. So and I really do. It's something I've done. Maybe a handful of times. It's not like my main bag, but I am good at it and love working with podcasters. As well. So I'm definitely here if anyone on the airwaves is in need of something like that. Or hey, shout out any aspiring indie musicians. I also have my own studio here in St. Louis if you're local, or remotely. I work with people I across the US, and also in Europe, as long as they know English. So
yeah, it's kind of funny because like you mainly make very, very cool like hip hop and R&B songs, and then you also help cat lady podcasters like myself.
Yes.
So I want to drive this home that Drew has range.
Yeah, well, you also, I do have range. I do I promote myself as like an R&B producer, because I have found that you kind of have to specialize. I used to try to do the thing like I do everything, and it's like I can do so many genres. And I mean, even genres that I haven't done, it's like, if you give me a few days to listen to stuff, I can come back and produce you a genre that I've never done before, and I can do podcasts, and I've done, short film work, with sound effects and scoring, and I, do TV background music and all this stuff. But it's like, when you try and tell somebody you do everything, they can't picture what you can do for them necessarily. But, I've done a lot. I mean, first of all, you wanted to do like a funky kind of
disco
musical intro. And that's, that's incredibly like in the R&B universe already. So it's like, even if I'm just saying I'm an R&B specialist, like that's totally within the wheelhouse. But I also have a ton of past experience playing with funk bands, producing funk music and dance music. And so, it's not only adjacent to how I currently promote myself, but I have a huge, background in that. I mean, playing with funky bands is really like my real like start, especially by the time that I became a music student at Webster. That was like my real background, playing with bands as a guitar player. And when I was doing my singer-songwriter thing, it was like pop singer-songwriter with like the funky influence. It was kind of it was like, I hate to say it because they're so lame now, but it was like Maroon 5-esque, but like their first album that was like actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And like really fresh at the time. So, and I was also very R&B influenced back then as well. But anyhow, that ended up being in my wheelhouse, plus like just the unique request of like adding a little bit of touch of spooky to it, which that was like the fun challenge of it. But I started hearing little spooky melodies in the back of my mind, like because typically I like, just like we did, I have a conversation with the client, whether that be an artist or a podcaster or someone, the music supervisor for a TV show or something, or a filmmaker. We have a conversation, and usually, I have enough experience in those conversations now where I can lead that down a direction where I, before the conversation's even over, I'm hearing things in my head of like, yeah, I've like, by the time I say, yeah, I can do it, I've already, got my first like demo rolling around in my brain. So it's like, and what's ended up as the theme to this show was, a development of basically like my first idea. Fortunately, it worked out. It was in the back of my mind like that. I jammed on it a little bit on my own time, and I was like, I think this could work. And then by the time you got to the studio and I showed it to you, you were, I took your feedback into it, and then we came up with it, and I'm really proud of it, and I think it's super fun, and I'm really impressed with having been involved with, having tried my hand at podcasting, having been involved in the starts of other podcasting. I'm really impressed with how this show is going. I think your hosting is great. You're really you're insightful with the questions. You're natural as a host. With some outside help, the audio is really great, and
right.
And having the fun music is really cool too. So I'm really impressed, and I was excited when you asked me to try out an episode, because I'm always I'm always down to do a podcast if it was a podcast absolutely nobody listened to. It's like, well, I can take some clips and put it on my Instagram and have a nice conversation with somebody, and it's all a win. So yeah, I'm giving you some flowers. I really enjoyed.
Oh, thank you so much.
I have listened to to episodes, and definitely will continue to check in on it.
Yeah, and it's just so great because like I was kind of joking about this with a friend. Like, you did the music, and then Lauren Seeley, who will also be a guest on the show in the upcoming weeks. I joke that you guys are the only professionals involved in this podcast. But, like, the thing is, like, it's just been nice to have, like, okay, boom, cover art. Here's the like phenomenal music as well. And just kind of presenting that to someone who's a prospective guest and being like, yes, this is legit. Granted, it's basically 100% indie, but it's just nice to have both the music and the artwork to create that picture,
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm going for it. Like, and yeah, and also I didn't mention the artwork, but I also really think the artwork is really great and has, adds a great dimension to the personality of it. I think that, the artwork is really crucial in, can someone see the artwork and see the title of the show and, and maybe the description, but maybe all they have to go off is the artwork. And it's like, can they kind of imagine what the show could possibly be like? And I think that the spirit of the show is in your artwork, and it's in the opening music. And, you're starting off as a great guest, and a great host. And I'm sure that you'll only get better and better with more experience. So yeah, I love the way you're, as I'm always very satisfied when, someone I work with, whether that be one of the music artists I produce or a podcaster, takes the work that we did and really packages it and delivers it in a really, clean way that communicates the quality of it. Like, you don't have to fake it till you make it, like you have some gigantic budget or something like that, but just to show that, like, I did put thought into I put thought into the title of the show, into the artwork of the show, the music of the show, or, the artwork of the album, the promotion of the album, the title of the album, whatever. I didn't, just like, AI generate a cover or, some like super low effort thing that's just like, because you hate to see, when I see something that just like looks obviously low effort, I'm like, that doesn't entice me to want to check it out. And, fortunately, I tend to work with great artists who take that stuff seriously too. But, it's always a bummer on the occasion when someone like takes your work and puts like a really crappy artwork on it, or puts like no effort into promoting it or something, and you're like, oh, come on, because I'm proud of the work we did. So anyway, but enough trashing on the people that don't do a good job. That was all just to say I think you're doing a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. So we have gotten to the point of the show, the spooky butt portion. So what spooky story did you bring today?
There were some spooky vibes in this studio I worked at for some years in Chicago that was built into this old building that, had turned into a warehouse, but it was initially, among other things, a bank. And there's this whole legend around, there were these bank vaults that Al Capone, used for his own personal money and whatever purposes. And these vaults were actually left behind and were like built inside. Our studio was like built around these vaults and still contained. Wow. We actually, the owner like had built a small like side editing studio into one of them, and then we used another one as a lounge. And so, there were nights where I slept at the studio, Because, at the time I didn't have a car. I lived in Chicago, and I was living like deep south at the time, south side of Chicago, and like the train out there stopped at midnight. And at the time I would take recordings. I was new to Chicago. I would take recording sessions, anybody, anytime. So I was working late nights often, sometimes through the nights, like people would call me, it'd already be like 11 o'clock at night, and people like, can I come in for a 2-hour session? I'm like, well, I've got I was like, well, I got someone here until 1 a.m. And they're like, all right, give me 1 to 3. Like, all right. Someone else will call, like, you in the studio? I'm like, dude, well, I mean, I'm booked until 3. They're like, give me 3 to 5. I mean, like, seriously, like, so I was like, not going to be able, I was way past being able to catch a train home, and I didn't want to pay for an Uber or something. I was broke at the time. And so I would sleep at the studio a lot, and I can't say that I saw or experienced anything spooky, but I sure kind of felt called back a little bit to like my days as a kid, falling asleep and being like, is there a ghost in here? Because, it was just like thinking back on the history of the place, and just like this super old building, and it still had like the original old wooden floors and the exterior walls and the old, vaults from like the 20s, and like, the hallway like leading into the studio was still like a lot of original stuff. And I was like, I was gonna say I was open to the spookiness finding me. I was hoping that it wouldn't.
Right.
And Al Capone's ghost never did visit me, but it was a conversation topic, with artists. It was always a fun conversation topic, and it made it into like lyrics of rap songs and stuff. Like,
oh my God.
Someone said, Al Capone in the booth, ghost of Capone in the booth while I spit, or like
that's
stuff
hilarious.
Like that, so people were like so there was a little bit of spooky influence on the music, even if like I wasn't, and we weren't firsthand experiencing it. Just like it added this mystique to the studio that was making it into lyrics and stuff like that. So, and it just had a very rustic vibe. And I mean, it also like added to it that the owner of the studio had it like decorated in a very interesting way. Like, it was like the walls were covered in these bookshelves with these ancient books and super old books and everything. Because, a lot of, you see sound baffling fixtures and stuff inside studios. You can imagine what that looks like. And a lot of that is just simply breaking up a sound wave, so that,
right.
Because a sound wave is a physical thing. And the worst thing that you can have are like totally flat surfaces with the sound waves just bouncing like from flat surface to flat surface. So you want things that break up the sound waves, and something that you can actually do instead of like your cliche sound treatment is use bookshelves, because the books are different shapes and sizes.
Oh, okay.
Different depths inside of the shelf and all that. And that can work as well as sound treatment. So, and he got all these books from just like places that were like giving away all these old books and stuff, and just like these crazy old books. So not only do we have in this, we're in this super old warehouse building, like right on the Chicago River, like just south of downtown. And we've got, these, Al Capone bank vaults, and we've got these old bookshelves. And it was just like a very, interesting vibe that, if nothing else, started conversations around the spooky. And there were, we didn't like allow them into our studio, but there was a ghost tour company.
Oh my God.
If I could have known that I was going to be on your show, I wish I would have taken the ghost tour myself. But there was a ghost tour company that did regular ghost tours through the building, and they like would come by our area where our studio was to talk about, the Capone stuff, and they would go down to like the dirt, like there was like a, basement, like dirt floor, like old spooky basement at the bottom of the warehouse building that they would go down to and give their ghost tours. So I would often, coming in and out of the studio, run into people like single file going throughout the building, doing their ghost tours. So I'm like on the side seeing if I can like if they like still exist.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Like I don't remember what their company was called, but I'm like I might it might be. There's this company called Gangsters and Ghosts. So they potentially, depending on where they cover, so there was definitely somebody around who was exploring the paranormal of my surroundings, if not me. So yeah, that's like my general experiences around spooky. Maybe you can lead me somewhere else, like, not necessarily anything firsthand, but I feel like I've been on the fringe of discovering something spooky, been in spooky spaces. People were like that ghost company were actively exploring spaces that I was in for spooky. And I'm certainly open to the existence of it all. Do I want to meet a ghost? Probably not. But I don't know. Maybe it could be a really cool experience. Maybe ghosts are nice.
Well, I do have a question about the studio in Chicago. Is that place, like, is it still a studio? Like,
it's not,
like still
unfortunately.
Operates? Okay.
It was, the owner had it for 10 years and it was going really well and we were busy and everything. And it was, but he didn't own the space. He rented it, but it was within this big warehouse and it was really easy for us to do our thing uninterrupted, but it was bought out. And like within a month, the new management was like, we're trying to turn this into self-storage. So we got booted.
Interesting.
So yeah, so I don't know if, if they did something. I imagine they unfortunately just tore down the studio space and, it'd be interesting to know if they relocated those vaults or not. It sure would have been a lot of work. So, although it was bought out by like a major corporation, so they might have had the U-Haul. So they might have had the funds.
Oh, okay.
They might have had the funds to do that. But, the ghost of Capone or maybe somebody he whacked or something might be living in somebody's U-Haul self-storage unit right now.
God, could you imagine? You like lift up the shit.
The gate, the little mini garage door.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
like, was it, I mean, yeah, there were like the ghost tours and all that, but like, was it a legend or was it proved that Al Capone actually used that space?
I wasn't able to verify it from an official source, but it was like it was an accepted as fact legend.
Okay.
What do I have any actual proof? No, but it was to the people that rented and managed that building and the people that came through the building and the people who ran ghost tours out of there. It was it was accepted as a fact that he, banked there and stashed things in those vaults. So, that was good enough for me.
Yeah, because like on the one hand, I feel like cities that kind of have crazy history like this, sometimes places will be like, oh, Al Capone stayed here and blah, blah, blah. And they're just trying to like garner interest.
Oh, all over the place. Sure.
Like the place where this was located, like just south of downtown, I'm pretty sure that was like his very, very like active zone. So
it's in the right area. It's the building is the right age. It was a believable story. And with a little research, I'm going to have to put it in the category of legend. But the legend around this place was, because the legend is that Capone had vaults, around the city. And the legend is that some of the vaults in this building were vaults of his. And that was, part of the premise of the Ghost Tour company and all of that. So whether it was actually true or just legend, a little more research might reveal, but it was something that was driving ghost tours, and it was a topic of conversation that was interesting to talk about it. It had made it into song lyrics for songs that I produced and recorded there. So, whether there's some real truth behind it or just some bullshit, it did make it into the legacy of my production work. So that's
hilarious.
Your spooky connection there.
Well, and also like, since he had vaults around the city, there's probably no way to like definitively prove, because he probably took out the space in someone else's name. Like he didn't want a paper trail,
right? Totally.
So I'm leaning towards it actually being like, just because it was so close to the Lexington Hotel. I'm like, okay,
it's the right area.
Kind of makes sense.
It's the right kind of vault. It's, it's the right time period. So, could be.
So before we wrap up, I like to ask if the guest has any last words, anything that they kind of want to end on.
Sure. If anyone else is listening and is a podcaster or looking to launch a podcast, I'm available to do the kind of work I did here for Spooky Butt, whether that be helping build a template and teaching you how to edit and mix the thing, and or creating you a music theme. For Spooky Butt here, we did a theme that we did an intro version and outro version, and I made her several little interlude pieces that she can use in the middle of the show, where she transitions from kind of the interview focused, the guest focused interview to the spooky focused part of the interview. Same thing. I'm available to talk with, I'm also just available to talk, no commitments. We can see if it's a fit for your podcast, or if you're a musician, and if any of the production and musical philosophy that I talked about sounds like something that could interest you. You can find me at drewmantia.com, drewmantia.com, to get more info, fill out my contact form. I'm also, Drew Mantia, my name, no space, on all the social medias, at Drew Mantia on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, any of those. I don't really use Facebook, but I mean, there's a page. So, you can feel free to reach out to me on, particularly my website or Instagram are really the best places. And if you're interested at all, if you have any questions about anything I said, you can feel free to reach out. Yeah, I'd love to talk to anyone that's curious. Or hey, if you were just if you're a fan of hip hop and R&B, then I might have some music on my pages that I've produced that you might be into listening to. So if you're open to discovering some new artists, also some pop stuff in there as well, then you can also I post clips of that on my Instagram and also on my website. You can find like a playlist with some of my top portfolio picks and things like that. My YouTube has a YouTube playlist that I'm proud of that has a collection of music videos for songs that I've produced. So if you have had your curiosity struck at all by what I had to say here, please, or hey, if you like the Spooky Butt podcast theme, check out some of my other work and maybe you can find one of your new favorite artists, because I work with some incredibly talented singers and songwriters that I'm honored to produce and co-write with, and we've made some really great songs. So if you're already an indie music fan, or you're willing to give indie music a try for the first time, hey, even if it's not my production or my artists, also just shout out to indie music. There's so much amazing music out here that maybe isn't being recommended to you by the algorithms, or if you still listen to the radio or watch TV or all those things. So, hey, maybe I'm just going to plug the concept of indie music. You're listening to this podcast, so maybe you're down to listen to some indie music.
Hell yeah.
DrewMantia.com, Instagram @DrewMantia. See if there's something for you there.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great. And on that note, goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Spooky Butt. Music by Drew Mantia. Artwork by Lauren Seeley. Listen to Spooky Butt on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Follow Spooky Butt on Instagram @SpookyButtPodcast. Need to make contact? Send us an email at spookybuttpodcast@gmail.com. We'll see you on the other side. Goodbye.